The sun was a killer. It hung in the empty blue sky, beating down on the prairie grass until it bleached the color right out of the world. Young Jake Morrison, only 22 and greener than the spring grass he'd left behind, felt its heat like a brand on his skin. He'd been separated from the cattle drive for 3 days. 3 days since a lightning strike spooked his horse and sent him running into the one place every child in Cedar Creek was taught to fear: Apache land. The stories they told were of ghosts in the dust, of warriors who could kill a man from 100 yards with a silent arrow. Every shadow, every whisper of the wind made Jake's hand twitch toward the cold iron of the Colt, 45 at his hip. He'd never drawn on a man, never even seen real violence up close. But out here, the weight of that gun felt like the only friend he had left in the world. His horse, Belle, was smarter than he was. She picked her way through the rocks and canyons, her ears swiveling, catching sounds he couldn't hear. His father, a hard man with hands like worn leather, had always said, "Trust your horse more than your eyes." Now, with his water almost gone and his throat feeling like sandpaper, Jake wished he'd listened to more of his father's lessons. He wished he knew how to read the land. He wished he wasn't so damn alone. Then he saw it, a thin, dark green line snaking through a valley below. Cottonwoods, willows, water. Hope surged in his chest, hot and sharp, but caution followed it like a cold shadow. Water was life, and everything, and everyone came to water. He had no choice. Without it, he and Belle would be bones bleaching in the sun by week's end. He guided Belle down a narrow game trail, loose rocks skittering away under her hooves. The air grew cooler as they descended into the canyon's shade. But the silence grew deeper, more watchful. The feeling of being watched prickled the back of his neck. He saw nothing but rock and thorny mesquite, but the feeling wouldn't go away. The trail opened up to a small, clear pool fed by a spring bubbling right out of the rock. It was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. He let Belle drink first, his hand never leaving his pistol, his eyes scanning the canyon walls, searching the shadows. He saw the tracks when he finally knelt to drink, hoof prints in the soft mud. Not shod like Belle's, unshod ponies, Apache, and they were fresh, no more than a few hours old. Fear, cold and metallic, flooded his mouth. He should leave, right now. Mount up and ride until Belle dropped. But his body screamed for water. He plunged his hands into the pool and drank, the cold liquid a shock to his system. It tasted of dirt and minerals and life itself. He was splashing water on his face when he smelled it, the scent of rain on dry earth. He looked up. The clear blue sky was gone. In its place, dark, bruised-looking clouds were boiling up from the west. A storm was coming, a real desert gully washer. He knew what that meant. Flash floods, lightning. He frantically scanned the canyon walls for shelter. And there it was, a dark slash in the rock, almost hidden behind a curtain of thorns. A cave. He dragged Belle toward it, the thorns tearing at his shirt. Inside, it was larger than it looked, cool and dry with a sandy floor. He'd just pulled the saddle off Belle when the first fat drops of rain began to fall. Within moments, the sky opened up. Lightning tore the world in half, followed by a crack of thunder that shook the very bones of the earth. He was trapped, a stranger in a hostile land, hiding in a cave that could belong to anything or anyone. As darkness fell, a bitter cold settled in. He pulled his bedroll around his shoulders but didn't dare light a fire. Smoke was a signal, an invitation. He sat in the dark, listening to the storm rage, thinking of home, of the life he might never see again. The rain was turning the canyon floor into a raging river, water creeping closer to the cave's entrance. He pulled Belle deeper inside, his heart pounding in time with the thunder. And it was in the next flash of lightning, a flash that lit the cave as bright as day, that he saw it. He wasn't alone. In that single blinding moment, Jake's world stopped. Pressed against the far wall, almost invisible in the deep shadows, was a figure. His hand flew to his Colt, the hammer clicking back with a sound that was swallowed by the storm. But before he could aim, another flash of lightning illuminated the space between them. It wasn't a warrior, it was a woman. She was young, maybe 20, and wore a simple dress of soft doeskin. But the beadwork on it was so intricate it glittered like a constellation in the strobing light. Her long black hair was loose, framing a face with high cheekbones and eyes that burned with the fury of a cornered animal. In her hand, she held a long, wicked-looking skinning knife. She was Apache. There was no doubt about it. They stared at each other across the 20 feet of sandy floor, two ghosts trapped in a box of stone. Jake kept his hand on his gun, but he didn't raise it. The woman's knuckles were white where she gripped her knife. "Easy," Jake said, his voice a rough croak. He didn't know if he was talking to her, to his horse, or to himself. "You leave," she said. Her English was clear with just a slight accent. "This is my place." Jake swallowed, his throat still dry. Outside, the storm was a monster. "Can't do that, miss," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "Storm's too bad. I'll stay on my side. You stay on yours." She let out a short, bitter laugh. "White man's promise," she spat, the words dripping with contempt. "Worthless." The sting of her words was sharper than he expected. He slowly, deliberately took his hand off his pistol and held both palms up. "I'm not looking for trouble. Just shelter. Same as you." She watched him, her dark eyes weighing him, judging him. The cave was big enough for two, but the canyon of distrust between them was 1,000 miles wide. Finally, she gave a short, sharp nod, though her knife never wavered. "You stay there," she warned. "Come close, I cut you." Jake nodded back. "Understood." He moved to the far side of the cave, settling Belle, rubbing her down with a piece of burlap. The familiar motions helped steady his hands. "What's your name?" he asked, not looking at her directly. The silence stretched, filled only by the roar of the rain. "Sarah," she said finally. "My white name is Sarah." It sounded wrong, a name that didn't belong to her. "And your real name?" The pause was even longer this time. "Ayana," she said, and the bitterness was back. "It means eternal blossom, a stupid name for a stupid girl who believes stupid lies." He risked a glance at her. Even in the flickering light, he could see she was beautiful, but there was a deep, broken sadness in her eyes. "I'm Jake Morrison," he offered, "from Cedar Creek." "I know Cedar Creek," she said, and her voice went cold. "Your people there killed my cousin, hanged him, said he stole a horse. He never stole anything in his life." Jake's gut twisted. He remembered the hanging. The whole town had turned out. The evidence was flimsy, a white rancher's word against a boy who couldn't speak English. "I'm sorry," he said, and he meant it. "Sorry," she echoed the word, making it sound ugly. "White men are always sorry. After." She shifted and he saw her wince, her hand going to her side. "You hurt?" "Not your concern, white man." They fell into a tense silence, the storm raging outside and a different kind of storm brewing inside the cave. Jake's stomach rumbled. He hadn't eaten since morning. He pulled out what little he had, some hardtack and a can of peaches he'd been saving. He looked over at Ayana, sitting rigid against the rock wall. "You hungry?" he asked. "Got some to share." Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Why you share?" He shrugged, trying for a casualness he didn't feel. "My ma always said a meal tastes better with company, even if the company wants to stick a knife in you." He tried a small smile. For the first time, a flicker of something other than hate crossed her face. "Your mother, she is dead?" "Long time ago, when I was a kid." "My mother, too," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Soldiers came to our camp. She tried to protect the children. She was not fast enough." The story hung in the air between them, a shared ghost. The abstract horror of cavalry raids he'd heard about suddenly had a face. A daughter sitting just feet away. He opened the can of peaches with his knife and slid it into the space between them. "Peaches might help," he said quietly. "Sweet things sometimes do." She stared at the can for a long time before her slender fingers reached out and took a slice. She ate it slowly, as if trying to remember what sweetness tasted like. "Why are you alone?" she asked after a while. "Cowboys travel like wolves." "Got in a fight with an older hand," he admitted. He said I was too soft. I wanted to prove him wrong. Got separated from the others." It was a half-truth. He didn't mention the real reason he'd ridden off alone. He didn't mention the shame. "What about you?" Her face hardened again. I was a wife, she said, correcting herself. Was. The word was full of pain. Her father had arranged a marriage for her, a peace treaty between two families. But her husband's family hadn't wanted a woman who'd been to the mission school, a woman who could speak and read the white man's language. They said I was corrupted, she whispered, her hand drifting back to her injured ribs. They said I brought bad spirits. So they just cast you out? Jake asked, horrified. Her eyes met his, and what he saw there made his blood run cold. Worse, she said. Much worse. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one in her eyes. My husband, the son of the Yellow Horse clan. He wanted a son, a strong Apache warrior to carry his name. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion, which was somehow more terrifying. But I gave him a daughter, a small, weak thing who died before the moon turned full. Jake could only stare, the can of peaches forgotten between them. He said I was cursed, that the mission school had poisoned my womb. His mother agreed. She took a shaky breath. They tried to fix me, the old way, with fists and curses. Jake felt a hot rage build in his chest. He'd seen fights, brutal and bloody, but the idea of a man beating his wife, a woman who had just lost a child, it was something else entirely. It was cowardice. When that did not work, she continued, her gaze distant, they took me into the desert. They said the spirits would judge me. If I was worthy, I would survive. If not, she shrugged, a small, hopeless gesture. They had left her to die, not just abandoned her. They had performed a ritual of judgment, beaten her half to death, and left her as an offering to the unforgiving land. A sacrifice. I am nothing now, she whispered. Not Apache, not white, a ghost walking between worlds. Jake wanted to say something, to offer some comfort, but the words felt like ash in his mouth. He was just a boy who'd run from a fist fight with a drunk cowboy. What could he possibly say to a woman who had survived this? He moved without thinking, sliding across the sandy floor until he was closer to her. She flinched, her knife coming up instantly. I'm not going to hurt you, he said softly, holding up his hands. Just, nobody should have to carry that alone. She watched him, her eyes searching his face for lies, for traps. For a long, tense moment, she didn't move. Then slowly, so slowly, she lowered the knife. You are a strange white man, Jake Morrison. He saw that she was shivering, the cold of the night seeping into her bones. Without a second thought, he unwrapped his bedroll and held it out to her. She looked at the thick wool blanket as if it were a snake. What do you want for it? Nothing. It's cold. She hesitated, but the shivers racking her body made the decision for her. She snatched it from his hand, wrapping it tightly around her shoulders. This changes nothing, she said, her voice muffled by the wool. I will still cut you if you come close. Understood, Jake said, leaning back against the wall. He felt a profound shift in the small dark space. He was no longer just a lost cowboy. He was a witness, a guardian of a story so terrible it felt sacred. He had stumbled out of his own small world and into the heart of a tragedy he could barely comprehend. The lightning had become less frequent, but the rain was a steady, relentless drumming. Somewhere in the dark, a coyote howled, its lonely call echoing off the canyon walls. They sing for the rain, Ayanna said, her voice soft. They thank the spirits. Always sounded lonely to me, Jake admitted. Everything is lonely, Jake Morrison, she replied. But the coyote accepts it. He does not fight what is. White men, you always fight, always try to change what is. Jake thought of the fences, the railroads, the towns carving up the land. Maybe that's our curse, he said, never satisfied. Not a curse, she murmured, her voice growing drowsy with exhaustion. A choice. Always a choice. The storm finally broke with the dawn. A pale, watery light filtered into the cave, revealing a world washed clean. The canyon floor was a mess of mud and debris, but the air smelled of wet sage and new beginnings. Ayanna was still asleep, huddled in his bedroll. In the soft light, Jake could see the faint, yellowing bruises on her jawline, evidence of the brutality she'd endured. Seeing it in the light of day, so undeniable, made his hands clench into useless fists. He wanted to find the men who did this. He wanted to make them pay. He was saddling Belle when she stirred. She sat up, wincing as her bruised ribs protested. "We should move," she said, her voice still rough with sleep. "Water brings everyone, the good and the bad." He nodded. "You can ride," he offered. "I'll walk alongside." She shook her head, pride warring with pain on her face. "Apache woman walks. It makes us strong." "You're hurt," he insisted. "Strength isn't about suffering for no reason." She gave him a look that said he understood nothing. But then Belle, as if sensing the argument, stretched her neck out and nudged Ayana's hand gently. Ayana stared at the horse, then slowly, hesitantly, reached out and stroked Belle's nose. A tiny, fragile truce. They left the cave and began to walk, Jake leading the mare, Ayana moving beside him with a fluid grace that defied her injuries. He felt clumsy and loud next to her, his boots scuffing on rocks, his gear jingling. "You make much noise," she observed, "like a whole cavalry." "Never claimed to be a ghost," he retorted, and for the first time, he saw the corner of her mouth twitch in what might have been a smile. It transformed her face, giving him a glimpse of the woman she might have been before the world tried to break her. As they walked, she began to teach him how to place his feet to make less sound, how to read the signs of the trail, how to move with the land instead of fighting it. He was a clumsy student, but he was willing. He was learning that survival out here was about more than a gun and a strong horse. It was a language, and she was fluent. They stopped at midday to rest. He shared his last piece of jerky, and she pointed out a plant with a root that was good for pain. As she dug it up with her knife, her dress shifted, and he saw the deep, ugly bruises covering her side. "Let me look," he said gently. "My ma taught me some healing." She tensed. "It is nothing." "It's not nothing. It's something that could kill you if it gets infected." He looked her in the eye. "You saved me from the storm. Let me help you." After a long, silent battle with her pride, she relented. She lifted the edge of her doe-skin dress, just enough for him to see. The entire left side of her torso was a horrifying canvas of purple, black, and angry red. "Jesus," he breathed. "Your God had nothing to do with this," she said flatly, dropping her dress. The rage came back, hot and choking. "If I ever meet this yellow horse—" "You will do nothing," she cut him off, her voice like iron. "This is not your fight. This is not your honor to defend. Promise me, Jake Morrison. You see them, you walk away. I can't promise that." "Then I leave you now," she said, and he saw she meant it. "I will take my chances alone." He looked at her, at the fierce, unbreakable spirit in her eyes, and knew he had no choice. "All right," he said, the word tasting like defeat. "I promise." As the afternoon wore on, the canyon opened up into flatter, more traveled country. They were exposed, a white man and an Apache woman traveling together. It was a dangerous combination, an invitation for trouble from either side. "There's an old line shack up ahead," Jake said, pointing toward a distant smudge on the horizon. "Cowboys use it. Might be empty." "And if not?" Ayana asked, her hand resting on the hilt of her knife. "Then we deal with what we find," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Smoke was curling from the shack's chimney. It was occupied. Jake told Ayana to wait, but she shook her head. "Together," she said, "or not at all." "Sano." The door creaked open as they approached, and a grizzled old cowboy stepped out, a rifle held loosely in his hands. His eyes widened as he took in the sight of them. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "Jake Morrison? Thought you was buzzard food." Jake recognized him. Bill Hawkins, a man who'd worked for his father years ago. "Mr. Hawkins," Jake said, trying to keep his voice even. Hawkins's gaze flickered to Ayana, and his face hardened into a mask of contempt. "What in the hell are you doing with a squaw boy? Your pa know about this." Jake felt Ayana stiffen beside him. "She's with me," he said simply. "We need water and a place to rest for the night." "With you?" Hawkins spat. "Boy, you've gone loco. Folks'll have your hide for this." "I don't much care what folks'll say." "Your pa will," Hawkins sneered. He'll tan your hide 6 ways from Sunday. My pa ain't here, Jake said, his own anger rising. And the lady needs help. Lady, Hawkins barked a laugh. That what you're calling him now? His grip tightened on his rifle. I ought to run you both off my claim. You ought to remember it was my pa who gave you a job when no one else would touch you, Jake shot back, the words surprising even himself. Who pulled you out of a saloon brawl in Durango and paid your debts. You owe him, and you owe me. The old man's face flushed with anger and shame. He stared at Jake, then at Ayanna, then back at Jake. Finally, with a grunt of disgust, he lowered his rifle. Your funeral, boy, he growled, but she sleeps outside. I won't have no Apache under my roof. Then I sleep outside too, Jake said without hesitation. Hawkins shook his head. Damned fool, he muttered, turning and slamming the door behind him. Jake let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. I'm sorry, he said to Ayanna. He spoke the truth, she said, her voice quiet and heavy. This is what waits for us. Your people will see a traitor. My people will see a woman who chose shame. She looked at him, her dark eyes filled with a sad, ancient wisdom. There is no place for us, Jake Morrison. The question hung in the air between them, sharp and painful. What were they? Not enemies anymore. Not strangers, but not friends either. Something else. Something new and unnamed and dangerous. I don't know, she whispered, and for the first time he saw not just anger or pride, but fear. I don't know what we are becoming, but it is already too late to go back. They made camp a short distance from the shack, under the cold, unblinking eyes of the stars. Hawkins had thrown out a canteen and a small sack of beans, a begrudging payment on an old debt. As Jake built a small fire, Ayanna sat wrapped in his bedroll, staring into the flames. He was right, she said finally. This will go bad. Our people will not understand. Then we'll find somewhere they don't have to, Jake said, the idea forming even as he spoke it. Somewhere new, somewhere we can make our own rules. There is no such place, she said with weary certainty. Everywhere has eyes. Everywhere has memories. Everywhere has hate. Maybe, he said, poking the fire, sending a shower of sparks into the darkness. But maybe there are places in between, places for people like us. He looked at her, at the proud line of her jaw, the strength that had refused to break. My ma used to say the world was always changing. Maybe there's a place for us in the world that's coming. Across the flames, her eyes searched his. When did the frightened boy become a man who speaks of hope? Jake thought about the long night in the cave, the sight of her bruises, the standoff with Hawkins. Maybe somewhere between yesterday and today, he said honestly. Or maybe I'm still just a frightened boy, and these are just brave words. No, she said softly, and the single word was filled with a meaning that made his heart ache. Not just a boy anymore. They sat in silence, the vastness of the desert night wrapping around them. It was a fragile peace, a temporary truce with a world that wanted to tear them apart. But for the first time sitting beside her, Jake didn't feel lost. He felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Dawn brought the harsh reality back. They needed supplies, medicine, ammunition. They needed a town. There's a trading post south of here, Jake said, run by a man named McCready. He's different, trades with everyone, doesn't ask questions. And if he does, Ayanna asked, then we'll have answers, Jake said. They rode south, Ayanna mounted on Belle, Jake walking beside her. The heat was a physical weight, pressing down on them. To pass the time, she asked him about his mother. He found himself telling her stories he hadn't thought of in years, about her garden, her songs, the way she could make his stern father smile. Grief is a skinwalker, Ayanna said when he told her how his father had changed after she died. It takes the shape of the person you love, but it is something else inside. Her insight was so sharp, so true, it stole his breath. She, in turn, told him more about the mission school, about her love of reading, about the bitter irony of an education that had made her an outcast to everyone. They were two people from different worlds discovering they were fluent in the same language of loss and loneliness. They saw the trading post by midday, a squat, fortified adobe building that looked like it had grown out of the desert floor. Horses were tied to the rail outside. Jake's gut tightened. "Wait here," he told Ayana, helping her dismount in a thicket of mesquite. "Let me see who's inside." "No," she said, her voice firm. "We have said this, together." He started to argue, but the look in her eyes stopped him. He nodded. They walked toward the post, side by side, a silent, united front. Jake pushed open the heavy door and stepped inside. The air was cool and smelled of leather, spices, and gun oil. Behind a long counter stood a bear of a man with a wild red beard. McCready. His eyes took in Jake, then moved to Ayana, lingering for a moment before returning to Jake. "Well now," his voice rumbled. "Jake Morrison. Heard you were lost. Also heard there's a $50 bounty for bringing you back to your pa." Jake's hand instinctively went to his gun. McCready chuckled. "Relax, boy. $50 ain't worth the paperwork." He leaned forward, his expression suddenly serious. "But Bill Hawkins was just here, left at first light, spouting all kinds of poison. Headed back to Cedar Creek. You got more trouble coming than you know." Jake's blood ran cold. Hawkins hadn't just been angry. He'd gone for reinforcements. McCready looked from Jake to Ayana, his gaze knowing. "I've been in this desert 20 years, son. I know what I'm looking at. And it ain't as simple as a lost cowboy and a stray Apache." He bellowed into the back room. "Maria!" A handsome Mexican woman emerged. She took one look at Ayana, at the way she held herself, at the pain she tried to hide, and her expression softened. "Come, child," she said in accented English, taking Ayana by the arm. "We will fix you. Men, you wait outside." McCready led Jake out to the porch. "You're in love with her," he said. It wasn't a question. "It's written all over you like a brand." "I don't," Jake started. "Don't bother denying it. I married Maria when her skin and her faith were enough to get a man hanged. Lost my family, my friends, everything." He looked out at the endless desert. "But I gained a partner, someone who stands with me. You ready for that, boy? To have nothing but her?" Before Jake could answer, Maria came out. "3 ribs cracked," she announced. "I have wrapped them. She is strong, but she needs rest and food." She looked at Jake, her dark eyes kind. "You will stay the night." That night, for the first time, they were safe. They ate a real meal at McCready and Maria's table. McCready told them about a place, a hidden valley south and west. Good water, good grass. Far enough away that a man and a woman could build a life without the world looking over their shoulder. Hope, a dangerous and unfamiliar feeling, began to stir in Jake's chest. Later, lying in the dark in the small room they'd been given, Ayana's voice came from the other bed. "Jake Morrison, today, when you stood ready to fight for me, no one has ever done that, not even my own people. You're worth fighting for," he said simply. There was a long silence, then, "This valley, you think we could make a life there?" "I think we could try," he said, "if you're willing." He heard her shift in the dark. "I think," she said softly, "I am already willing." The peace was shattered at dawn by the thunder of hoofbeats. Riders, a lot of them. McCready was at the window, rifle in hand. "It's Hawkins," he said grimly, "and he brought the whole damn town with him." And leading them, his face a mask of cold fury, was a man Jake knew better than anyone. His father, Thomas Morrison. Jake stood frozen, watching the posse pull up in a cloud of dust and hatred, his own father leading a lynch mob to his door. "Jake!" His father's voice boomed, a sound that had once meant safety and now felt like a judgment. "Come out, boy! You've shamed our name long enough." Jake pushed past McCready and stepped onto the porch. Ayana was right behind him, a silent shadow of support. Her presence at his back gave him a strength he didn't know he possessed. The faces in the crowd were all familiar, men he'd known his whole life. His cousin, Pete, Tom Bradley, whose brother had been killed in an Apache raid. They looked at him with a mixture of pity and contempt. "I'm not going back, Pa," Jake said, his voice shaking but clear. "My place is here." "Your place is with your own kind," Thomas Morrison roared. "Not with her." He spat the word, and Jake saw Ayana flinch as if struck. That was it. Something inside Jake, something young and afraid, finally broke. She has a name, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. It's Ayana, and she is my wife. A shocked silence fell over the posse. The word hung in the air, an impossible, unforgivable declaration. Wife? Hawkins laughed, a nasty, sharp sound. He's lost his mind. You've betrayed your blood, your family, your mother's memory, his father yelled, his face purple with rage. You come home now, or by God, you are no son of mine. My mother taught me kindness, Jake shot back. She taught me to judge people by their heart, not their skin. You're the one who's forgotten her. This was it, the final line drawn in the sand. Then Ayana did something incredible. She stepped forward, past Jake, into the full, harsh glare of the morning sun. She stood before them, small and injured, but radiating a power that silenced them all. And she began to speak in Apache. Her voice was not loud, but it carried, melodic and strong, a river of ancient words flowing into the tense silence. What's she saying? Someone muttered nervously. She switched to English, her gaze sweeping over them, pinning each man in place. I sing the death song, she said clearly. It is the song we sing when we face our enemies with honor. I tell the spirits I am ready. I tell them your names so they will know who sent me, so they will be waiting for you. A cold chill ran through the crowd. This wasn't just a threat, it was a curse. And I tell them of Jake Morrison, she continued, her voice softening as she turned to him. I tell them he showed an Apache woman kindness when her own people left her to die. I tell them he has honor. I tell them he is worth dying beside. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then his young cousin Pete slowly lowered his rifle. This is wrong, Pete said quietly. He's made his choice. It ain't our place. Get back in line, boy, Hawkins snarled. But the spell was broken. Doubt had crept into their eyes. The shot came from inside the trading post. Maria, standing in the doorway with a shotgun, had fired into the air. The next one goes lower, she said calmly. You want him, you come through me. You want her, you come through all of us. His father stared at him, his face a storm of rage and betrayal, and a pain so deep Jake could barely stand to see it. But he didn't lower his gun. He was ready to watch his own son die rather than see him with an Apache woman. The standoff stretched, thin and brittle. It was a choice between two worlds, a choice between his past and his future. And Jake knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that his future was standing right beside him. Jake met his father's gaze. There was no room for negotiation, no bridge to be built across the chasm that had opened between them. If you're going to shoot, Jake said, his voice steady, you'd better do it, because we are not backing down. He took Ayana's hand, their fingers lacing together, a silent, public declaration. Thomas Morrison's face crumpled, the rage giving way to a raw, wounded grief. He looked at his son, holding hands with an Apache woman, defying him, defying their entire world. With a strangled cry of fury and despair, he turned his horse and galloped away, the posse trailing uncertainly behind him. They were gone, for now. They'll be back, McCready said grimly. With badges, maybe. You have to leave. Now. McCready drew them a map on a piece of scrap leather, the hidden valley, a sanctuary. As they prepared to leave, Ayana pulled Jake aside. The words I sang, she said, her eyes searching his. The death song. For my people, it is also the marriage song. The death of one life, the beginning of another. Her meaning was unmistakable. By our law, we are now bound. She looked at him, her pride a fragile shield for her vulnerability. If you will have me. He didn't answer with words. He pulled her into his arms, mindful of her ribs, and kissed her. It was a kiss of promise, of acceptance, a sealing of a pact made in chaos and fear. They rode out together on Bell, Ayana in front, Jake's arms around her holding the reins. They were leaving everything behind. Family, home, history. Ahead of them lay only uncertainty and danger. But as Jake felt Ayana lean back against him, a sense of peace settled over him. He wasn't a lost boy anymore. He was a husband. He was a man who had chosen his own path. The desert stretched before them, vast and indifferent. But for the first time, it didn't feel empty. It felt like freedom. They rode for a day and a half following the cryptic map, pushing deeper into a wilderness that grew more beautiful and wild with every mile. The confrontation had changed them. It had forged them into something new. There was no more uncertainty. They were a unit, a tribe of two. When they finally found the entrance to the valley, it was just as McCready had described, a narrow hidden passage between high rock walls. They emerged into a secret paradise, a long green valley with a stream running through it, sheltered from the world by towering cliffs. And at the far end stood a massive, ancient cottonwood tree, its branches adorned with hundreds of faded prayer cloths left by generations of Ayana's people. It was a sacred place. My grandmother told me of this place, Ayana whispered, her eyes filled with tears. A place of healing. The spirits here judge not by blood, but by heart. They added a strip of cloth from her dress to the branches, their hands working together. They were home. The next few weeks were the hardest and happiest of Jake's life. With the inheritance money his cousin Pete secretly brought them, a final act of defiance against Jake's father, they bought tools and supplies. They worked from sunup to sundown, building a small adobe house with their own hands. He mixed the clay. She showed him how to form the bricks. She taught him which plants to eat. He taught her the English words for the stars. They were building more than a house. They were building a world. A world where an Apache woman could be a wife and a white man could be a husband, and no one could tell them it was wrong. They were creating their own map, their own rules, their own language of love and survival. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their nearly finished home, watching the sunset paint the cliffs in fiery colors, Ayana took his hand and placed it on her stomach, a small, almost imperceptible curve. The dream was true, she said, her voice soft with wonder. Spring will bring more than new grass. Jake's breath caught in his chest. A baby, their baby, a child of two worlds, who would be born in a place where those worlds could finally meet. He pulled her close, his heart overflowing. The lost boy from Cedar Creek and the cast-out bride from the Yellow Horse clan had found their way not just to a hidden valley, but to a future neither of them had dared to imagine. As darkness fell and the coyotes began their nightly song, the sound was not one of loneliness, but of celebration. It was the sound of a wild and beautiful world, and in the heart of it, a family was beginning. A testament to the idea that love, like a stubborn flower in the desert, could bloom in the harshest of places. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey. We hope Jake and Ayana's story of courage and love touched your heart. We read every single one of your comments and love hearing where in the world you're listening from, so drop a comment below and let us know. If you enjoyed this story and want more tales from the edge of the map, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Your support means we can keep bringing these incredible stories to light. Until next time, stay safe and keep exploring the unknown.